Hello, this is Visitations Conversations. The purpose of this program is to provide inspiration to people aspiring to go deeper into the world of comics and entertainment. Please check out this channel for interviews that range from comic creators, podcasters, cosplayers, and filmmakers. My name is Scott Larson. I am the creator of the independent comic book series Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. It's part history, part adventure, and part horror story all rolled into one, kind of like The Untouchables meets Indiana Jones in a graveyard. If you're interested in reading a digital copy of the first issue for free, please feel free to email me at visitationscomicbook, all one word, at gmail.com or click the link below. Today I have the pleasure of talking to a couple of different people. They are therapists, which is always good for the comic and geeky community. But they've written this wonderful book called Starship Therapise, using therapeutic fan fiction to rewrite your life. My guests are Larisa Garski and Justine Mastin. And if you guys would like to come on, that'd be great. And we'll talk some more about you and your book.
Hi,
Hello,
Scott.
Justine.
Hello.
Hi, Larisa. So do you want to introduce yourselves real quick, since there's two of you?
Sure. Yep. Hi, I'm Justine Mastin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, a yoga teacher, a podcaster, a writer, obviously. And I'm also an educator. I now educate the therapist youth. I have too many jobs. That's why Larissa's laughing.
Okay.
That, and I thought you might like botch the pronunciation there at the end, but you didn't. You did an epic job, so well done.
Who, me?
Yes, you.
What was I going to pronounce?
I think it's best to just let it lie.
All right.
All
who
right,
are you?
should I go? Who am I?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Larisa Garski. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a writer, researcher, and what I say in the podcast is Spockian first officer of our podcast, the Starship Therapise. Anything else you need to know about me? No. I
Okay.
work a lot, but
yeah,
but
you are a supervisor. You supervise many people.
that's true. I'm a supervisor. I supervise many people. I'm the chief of clinical staff at Empowered Therapy, which is a therapy practice in Chicago, Illinois. And I love what I do. And I'm also very tired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm not gonna start with the book yet, but before I'm gonna go into the book, I'm curious as to your background. Obviously, the book is centered on the comic book Star Trek, community.
Mhm.
And I'm curious as to how you got into that in the first place. So whoever would like to start.
Yeah. So I started serving the community of outsiders because that is the community of which I am a part. When I was in my own training in graduate school, I kept getting feedback from, the powers that be that I just wasn't being authentic. And, Scott, you and I have met many times. It might seem like, you seem like a very authentic human. But I was afraid to bring this person into the therapy room because I'd never seen anyone like me as a therapist. So I would go into my therapy sessions and, dress all conservative and be like, and what brings you in today?
My favorite way that you've put this before is that in your training, you tried to channel a beige sailboat.
Or a beige wall or a picture of a sailboat.
A beige wall upon which hung a painting or a photograph of a sailboat, because you thought that like that was calm, that was therapeutic. So you would just be the therapy version of a beige wall on a sailboat.
Yeah. And what I discovered is I'm not a beige wall or a picture of a sailboat. I am whatever this is. And once I started bringing that into the therapy room, I was like, well, the people who resonate with this are people who are similar to me in that, they have nerdy, geeky, weird interests that I can use a lot of metaphors for. So I was like, you know what? People who show up in the world as a little bit more of a beige wall, they have therapists, but the rainbow walls have fewer therapists. So that's kind of my story. How about for you, Spock?
Well, I feel like very typical to someone who identifies with the character Spock. I had a very sort of like compartmentalized existence. Like from a very young age, I was really into Star Trek. TNG was sort of my first entry into the fandom, but I got into all of them. Except for that Enterprise show, I just couldn't roll with that one. But like that's a story for another day. So when I was a kid, I was really into Star Trek Next Generation. I would like get on my bicycle and like bike to the Quick Stop, which had like comics, and I was really into the Uncanny X-Men comic books, and I loved all those things. But that side of my life and that side of my personality, I kept very separate from my academic and eventually my professional self. And I would say that worked a little bit longer for me than I feel like it did for you, Justine, in part because I am very authentically Spock. Like I'm very analytical, I'm very logical. And so it felt true to me in many ways to show up in that way in the therapeutic space. But I think very fortunately, we met in graduate school and we actually interned at the same therapy private practice. And it was very much, I think, because of your influence, Justine, that you very sort of gently nudged me to bring this other side of myself into the therapy room. And now, all these years later, it's really funny to me to think about how nervous I used to be to bring in something like Star Trek to the therapy space, or to bring in like something like, I don't know, like video games. Now I use that kind of language all the time to talk about skills and coping and strategies. But very early on, I was so nervous because I thought I was worried like it wasn't professional or it wouldn't be appropriate. And then I was also really afraid of like showing too much of myself to my clients. But like, no, I don't worry about any of those things. I know where my boundaries are and I'm cool with it.
Okay, so I need to circle back to Justine real quick. So, so Larisa just mentioned that she biked to the Quick Stop and
did.
got comics. I used to do that too, although
Nice.
mine were the Star Wars comics that Marvel were doing. That, not to tell you my age, but they'll should explain exactly how old I am. I noticed as you were talking about yourself, I didn't hear anything about comics. I didn't really hear anything about Star Trek. All I heard were the words geeky, nerdy, and weird. And so I'm curious as to what your interests were and what brought you into this. You know, I heard TNG, Everything But Enterprise from Larisa, but nothing about your interest, Justine. So if you'd like to tell us a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was coming up, I'm between the two of you in age. And but I came up in a time without internet. I didn't know that there were fandoms. Like I didn't know there were communities of fandoms. I'm from central Pennsylvania. But I was a theater kid, so I guess I was in theater fandom. So I was very into musical theater. But also I was very fortunate that my parents were both great story lovers. Books, movies, TV. I had a wide array of art supplied to me at a young age. And some of it I didn't care for.
Well, you were a kid, you know.
I was like, the third man, get this away from me.
Which is a great black and white picture, by the way. Highly recommend.
Yeah. But I mean, I've, from a young age, I was really into, like, I loved Clue, and I loved in the 90s, I loved The Crow. So, like, I had some, I had the Crow comic book. I wasn't huge into comics. I didn't really know what comics were as a younger human. It wasn't something I was exposed to. So I say that my first real fandom, and I didn't know there was a community, I just felt so attached to it, was Twin Peaks. And I was probably like 10 or 11 when Twin Peaks came out. But there was something about this bizarre world that David Lynch created and these fully formed, fascinating characters that I felt really drawn to. So as far as fandom, I've always been more of a TV and movie nerd than a comic book nerd, although in the past 10 years or so I've gotten more into comics.
Mhm.
But when I was growing up, I loved Star Trek. We always had cartoons on at our house, lots of Simpsons and Ren and Stimpy.
Oh
Uh,
God, yeah.
yep, my dad loved Ren and Stimpy. So I have Larissa's described my fandom interests as being myriad, varied,
Hmm.
a, a great breadth, some with depth. Does that help?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's about helping or not. As far as the interview is concerned. All right, so I'm curious about something, and either one of you can jump in on this question.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about stories, and we'll talk about the book in a couple minutes. But I'm really curious. So you're growing up with Star Trek, you're growing up with The Crow, you're growing up with all of this stuff. At what point, or do you even dive deeper? It's like, for example, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I have gone back and I've listened. I've read The Hero with a Thousand Faces a number of times by Joseph Campbell,
Mm-hmm.
and you start to see different things. And that book is credited with basically everything that Hollywood does right now.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I found that's been so interesting about it, and especially the last time I went through it, which was real recently, was how much of my life I'm finding in it. And so I'm curious, what kind of research did you guys do once you got out of, oh, this is just a fun story with a bunch of mutants and people in a spaceship? And maybe you haven't done it, but at what point do you go into like the philosophical aspects of these stories, the theological aspects, the psychological aspects?
Mm-hmm. I'll let Larissa start this one since she
That's right.
studied
That's fair.
literature analysis.
I sure did. But actually, I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start
Okay.
with when I was a kid. So I feel like around the time of like maybe like 9 or 10, I started
Mm-hmm.
to get really into the backstory of the writers who wrote the stories that I was into.
Mm.
And I started to
Wow.
really get curious about the interplay between what was like on the page
Mm-hmm.
and what was happening for the artist in their life. And I think that really began for me sort of a lifelong interest in the ways that like story, narrative, art, I think is fundamental to the way that human consciousness develops. I think it's fundamental to the ways that we express our emotions and also the ways that we try to understand ourselves. I think people try to understand themselves, their lives, and make meaning by telling, by creating, by writing stories, by like creating any kind of art. And so I really got like, honestly, like the first thing that I really got into with that, Justine loves this because it was my first attempt at written fan fiction,
Mm-hmm.
was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I was super into that at the same time that I was into Uncanny X-Men and Star Trek, TNG, and Star Wars, of course. I was so into The Secret Garden. I was super into the Disney's 1993-94 version of it. I have no interest in the musical. I have parts that are very judgmental about that, but like mostly as an adult,
I'm
like,
a
it
little
just wasn't my
judgmental that
thing.
you don't like the musical.
That's
So...
fair. But at the time, it just like wasn't my thing. But I remember like going to the library and really wanting to know more about this person who created this world that I was so into, and I just couldn't find very much about her. And I also couldn't find very many of the other books that she had read. And then I want to say I got into like Lives of the Writers. It was like this illustrated book for kids back then. And it talked about like the lives and backstories of famous writers. And the writer of The Secret Garden was in there. And in learning about her experiences as a person who'd always loved gardens, that got me into this area of thinking about like the psychology behind the creation of these stories. As an adult and in preparation for the actual writing of this book, I mean, if anything, Justine and I probably did too much research. We did
because it was our first book and we wanted to really show that we knew stuff.
We sure did. And like, we do know things, but I think we maybe overdid it, but like we went hard on Joseph Campbell. And really, I found like the Masks of the Gods was so fascinating to read, which was the basis of a lot of what he did in The Power of Myth with Bill Moyers. Mm-hmm. And then of course, like a lot of where Campbell gets some of his stuff is from Carl Jung, which is one of the founding fathers of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. So I've talked enough. Justine, you wanna say some words?
Before we kick it over to Justine, yeah. So would you say, you're a therapist, would you say you are psychologically examining these authors?
Oh, absolutely. I did. I had no idea that's what I was doing as a kid, but I totally was. I was like, wow, this must be because this happened with their mother and she was getting divorced at this time. And that's why, right? Like I totally did that, which years later when I was in college is kind of a huge no-no in the literary criticism world. It's like, no, don't do that. That's not what it's about. It's about the art. And if anything, we can maybe look at like the culture that was going on at the time the art was created. But as a kid, and I have to be honest now, as an adult, as a psychotherapist, I still do a lot of like psychoanalysis of the writers because I think that's part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny, as you were talking, suddenly my brain was reminding me of comics I did read when I was a kid. It was like, hey, FYI, you did read some. My dad had some hidden heavy metal.
Okay.
That I found in his sock drawer and I read those. I can out him. He is no longer with us. So he
can't be embarrassed in the same way.
He can't be embarrassed in the same way. And also when you're talking about creators, I loved The Simpsons. And specifically, I was really into Matt Groening and who he was. Oh. And he wrote comics that are these adorable little bunny characters. And I can't they're like, school is hell, life is hell, love is hell. And I had all of them. I still do. I grabbed them from my parents' house when I was home. And they're just like this slice of life thing that felt so real to me. And I really dug that. But as far as like analyzing writers and creators, that's not where I was at as a younger person. No. And it's kind of not where I'm at as an adult. This is one of the beautiful things about Larisa and my collaboration is that we just have very different ways that we engage with story. So, and we talk about this in the book, we talk about this on the podcast, that, Larisa does want to dive like who wrote this and what's their story and what drew them to do this and
what were they trying to convey? What is it like? Did they convey the thing that they were trying to convey and how well did they do it? Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, here is this piece of art. What am I taking away from this piece of art? What am I making from this piece of art? What sense am I making? Because I believe that as soon as a story is brought out into the world, it's part of the collective unconscious, and it is no longer the sole property of the person who created it, which Disney would fight me on. But I still love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, even though I know Joss Whedon is problematic AF now. It's unfortunate. But I can still love those stories because I am connected to those stories in a way that is not connected to Joss Whedon. And that's all about what we call fandom attachment. Yeah, I see a thought balloon, Scott.
Yeah. So I'm curious. So Justine, you said that you're not examining, these authors. But I need to ask a question, and either one of you can jump in on this. Do you find with different writers, whether it's comic books or something else, the same themes tend to pop up? And if so, what's the explanation for that?
Collective unconscious.
Okay. What do you think, Larisa?
You're gonna define that Justine, in case we have some viewers who are like, what's that?
In case any folks at home, I mean, if you're watching this on YouTube, you've probably already Googled the collective unconscious after I said it the first time. But
yes,
this is Carl Jung's idea that, you know, we each have our individual consciousness, but then there is a collective unconscious that is, you know, you can think of it as the force. It is both around us and within us, and we can tap into it. And it is sort of the consciousness that goes back to the end of time, or the beginning of time. And we can dip a spoon into it and pull something out. And often what we spoon out is archetypes. You know, the idea of the hero or the sage. And so that's where so many of these stories come from a Jungian perspective. Mm-hmm. And then you also see a lot of transgenerational trauma, and that's just people who live in the world.
There you go.
But Larisa.
Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm remembering the question right, because I get so caught up in like imagining the collective unconscious. The question from you, Scott, is why is it when that stories that are created by unique individuals, why is there this commonality? Why is there this common thread? Is that the question?
Pretty much. And
sure.
I'll give you another example. There are a couple different comic book writers that I have in mind, but I'm not going to say their names. And there is somebody who, when this person writes, it's always, someone's always being taken advantage of in one way or another. And I can't help but look at these stories, and some of it's buried in there. I mean, you can't even tell. You think it's this fun superhero adventure, but then you're looking at it, it's like, wait a second. And it kind of helps if you know the person as well, and then you start to see little things. And so do you think, how can you, my question was, how can you not analyze the writer when these themes pop up over and over and over in their writings?
I mean, I do analyze the writer.
You do it. I guess, I mean, it's armchair psychology no matter what. But the, you know, my question was, how could you not? And Justine said that she believes that the writer keeps going back to the same themes because of collective unconsciousness. And you're saying that you do analyze the writer. And is that your final answer on that?
Me?
Yes. Larisa.
Or I mean, I think yes, and because I think one of the things that I've taken from like the beautiful partnership that Justine and I have, both as friends and as the creators and researchers and thinkers, is that I think it's important to make space for the ways that a story transcends whoever is telling or creating the story, right? Like, you're going to be able, especially if you know the artist, to look at a story and see the ways that their unique human experience is reflected in the story. But then there is also, there are two other things at play, right? The fact that like, there is a universal nature towards, there's a universality to the feelings that we feel as human beings. The details of our stories are unique. The pain, the love, the pathos, that's something that like we all go through. And so I think that is part of why we see these like story cycles repeating. I also think that part of it is, as Justine is speaking to, that we have this, like Karl Marx called it the species mind, right? This idea of that there is a hive mind to the human species. We each have our individual consciousness. I know. Justine loves this when Karl Marx enters the chat. He's here, guys. There's like we each have our individual consciousness, but we have a collective consciousness, the species mind, as Karl Marx called it, and we have the collective unconscious. So all the place where the human species, like instincts and drives and emotions and experiences that we've gone through again and again and again across hundreds of years, all exist. And so that, to me, these things all together explain why we see these stories repeating from different like places in time and different artists. But in terms of like, yes, do I always psychoanalyze the writer? Yeah. But I also like psychoanalyze the characters. And I also really love, bringing it back to Justine, I love the ways that Justine has taught me to free the art, free the story from the artist, free it from the creator, and be present with the characters that are there, be present with what I'm bringing to these characters, be present with the dynamic that I'm co-creating with them. So it's not just about like, how did Gene Roddenberry feel about Spock? It gets to be about, what do I feel about this character, and what am I bringing as my own unique person? And so there's just beautiful variations now of this one character. And I don't think there's like any right or wrong version. It's just like making space for this wonderful variety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and I love psychoanalyzing characters. That's
yeah,
a totally different story.
I'm going to throw a psychoanalytic question at you both, and then we'll talk about the book, I promise. And because I'm curious about
this
that.
This is all related.
It is all related. So so you had mentioned symbolism, and so I'm curious, what kind of symbol? And you mentioned symbolism in the context of an archetype.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me, it's a two-part question for both of you, symbolism that you've seen in a story, a particular story, mm-hmm. and perhaps a symbolism that you've seen in your own life?
Well, I'm not entirely sure this is exactly what you're asking, but mm-hmm. What immediately popped into my head was the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. which is a symbol of a burden. And it is a burden that cannot be destroyed. It needs to be returned to where it was created, which is, from a psychotherapy perspective, we have burdens that were given to us by our parents, by their parents, by their parents, by their parents. And we didn't ask for this, we didn't make it, and yet it is ours. And we can't destroy it. Mm-hmm. And if we keep it, it will destroy us. And so the only way that we can heal is to return that burden to the person who created it. And for us, that's emotional, right? I have decided I'm no longer going to keep this trauma that is not mine. I'm going to emotionally return it to the person who was actually hurt. But in Lord of the Rings, they do such a beautiful job of, and I don't know if Tolkien meant to do this, but he did a beautiful job of explaining how you have a burden. Nobody wants to carry it. And it takes a village to be able to return that burden to where it came from. And I pull symbols from stories out into my life to help me make sense of my own life. So I've got some I've got some dragons here that I'm sipping my tea out of so that I can feel like a powerful mother of dragons when it's been a terrible week and I'm trying to hold space for the people who need my care. So I'm not sure that's exactly the question you were asking, but I hope it was close enough.
To that. How about you, Larisa?
So I would be remiss if I didn't, and like what's happening for me as I'm remembering, the first piece of writing Justine and I ever did was for Supernatural Psychology.
Oh yeah.
On the ways that the Supernatural television show uses and sort of embodies the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. And that it's a co-hero's journey between two humans, the brothers, Sam and Dean Winchester. And at one point in there, I was trying to explain the animus archetype, which is just like one of the I mean, obviously I love Carl Jung, but like, wow, he didn't explain that one super great all the time. But anyway, I was trying to in the chapter, and our editor came back and I used the word symbol as a synonym for archetype. And he was like, no, you can't do that. They're totally different. And I was like, okay, cool, Travis, how are they different? And he was like,
knows
look
Travis.
it up. He was like, I don't have time for this. Go look it up. And I did. And I have to be honest and say that I was still confused, and I still am sort of confused. But this is what I think the difference is that the archetype means that old ancient instinct that lives in the collective unconscious. And the symbol is what happens when we are inspired by the archetype and then try to create a metaphorical version of it here in our conscious world and in our reality. So for example, I love me some real life things. Okay, so we got Baby Yoda here.
Mm-hmm.
The archetype that empowers Baby Yoda, the symbol, is the archetype of the child, which is to say the archetype of a being of like great potential, great innocence, but great vulnerability, right? And Baby Yoda is a symbol of that inner child that exists within all of us as human beings. And the child archetype is part of what gives them their shine and their power.
Mm-hmm.
Did I do it? Did I answer the questions, guys?
Oh, sure. Of course you did. The reason I ask, have either of you heard of Thomas Troward?
No.
Mm-mm.
He was one of the around the turn of the century, he did a lot of work in the New Thought movement.
Mm-hmm.
And he's written a number of things which are incredibly difficult to understand. And his name has popped up a few times on some of the stuff I've been looking at. And I thought, oh, well, and as well as he's really difficult to read. And it's like, oh, I'm smart enough. I can figure this stuff out. And I've since abandoned that for right this moment, until I have like a book I can underline and like really go through it. But one of the things that he had said, and one of the things that I had started, was he talked about our lives, and he was talking to a certain degree about the collective unconsciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And what's being projected on the outside screen of our lives. But he mentioned that a lot of this life we're walking through is symbolism. And I had an experience, and it was really, I'll share this with you real quick. I had this experience a number of years ago where things weren't quite going right for me. I'll just leave it at that. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I had bought a house, and we were doing a bunch of construction work on it. And there was no mirror in my bathroom. And there was like this teeny tiny mirror that was probably about this big. And I would try to like shave in it and stuff. And one day I was like, oh, this is BS. I'm not doing this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I went and I got the mirror, which just had not been attached to the cabinet. And it still hasn't been attached to the cabinet, but I got it and I stuck it where it ought to be. And all of a sudden I'm looking at this image of myself, and I was just like, oh, there you are. Right. And there was a difference in the way that I was looking at life. And I was trying to explain it to my mother-in-law, and I said, well, I didn't really feel like myself. And then I got the mirror back, and I started looking, and I felt a lot better about myself. And she just looked at me and said, that's too deep for me, and walked away. And that was the end of the conversation. But
good boundaries, mother-in-law.
Yes,
I guess so. She knew what she couldn't do, and she named them and left.
So, but I thought it was very interesting that you were talking about archetypes and symbolism. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I had read from Thomas Troward about how we're walking through life, and these images that we're walking through are symbolic. Mm-hmm. And I was curious to see what I didn't want to come out and reveal my story before I heard what you had to say. Mm-hmm. I didn't want you to be influenced by it. So I know the question was a little confusing, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. And actually, what the story that you just shared is making me think a lot about some reading I'm doing right now. Justine is going to laugh at me again, of this German philosopher, Byung-Chul Han.
Byung has entered the chat.
Byung has now entered the chat. Byung does a lot of writing about like Hegelian Marxist dialectics. He does a lot of like thinking about like criticism. And
no, I love you so much.
Thank you. The ways that social media is impacting human consciousness, both individually and sort of collectively, right? And one of the things that in the book of his that I'm reading right now called Capitalism and the Death Drive, it sounds dour, but I'd recommend it. It's like pretty easy to understand, however quite grim. And he talks about how one of the truths of human existence from his perspective is that we only really learn about ourselves when we are in like communication and sometimes confrontation and sometimes conflict with another human being. And that other human being has to be totally different from who we are. And that it's so necessary to have this dialogue, this back and forth between the self and this other person to really learn about them and to really learn about you. And that part of that is that then you have time that you spend away from this kind of back and forth engagement and really get a chance to like be with yourself and learn about yourself. And that's totally what I thought of, Scott, when you talked about how you put on the mirror and you were like, oh, there I am. And I think that's something very central to our existence as human beings. We want to know ourselves. We want to be able to recognize ourselves and feel like safe and whole and embodied in who we are as individuals.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So you're talking about us being in conflict with somebody in the opposite, and we're living in a society right now, and this conversation is a lot different than most of the conversations that I do here. But we're in a society now where we're kind of separate. They're talking about we're separated by the different silos. It's like, I believe in this, so I'm only hanging out with these people, and I'll just describe it like that because a lot of it becomes political and then it becomes like this. But the way you're talking right now is that these confrontations that we have with each other, which aren't happening right now, are very important. And so now it's just like that person is the enemy and I'm not going to talk to them, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to like listen to whatever the nonsense this person's saying and believe it's true. Because it lines up with what I want to believe. So are you saying in the stuff that what we're doing right now is kind of counterproductive to growing as human beings?
I am saying that. And I actually think that in some ways this connects back to therapy. And part of why I think therapy has like the power to really help folks grow and heal is that when I'm sitting down with a client, when I'm sitting down with someone I work with, they are a different human being from me. And you best believe that I have had truly like the honor and the privilege to work with some folks who have had some very different experiences from me and believe and espouse and talk about things that like I sometimes will sit back and I'm in my head, I'm like, wow, I don't see it that way at all. And what I'm required to do as a therapist is I'm required not to dismiss them. If I dismiss them, then I'm not doing good therapy. Then I better be referring them out, because then they need to go to someone else who can sit there and be present with this like very different perspective and not judge, not shut down, but keep being present, keep being curious, keep being compassionate. And I gotta say, like some of the more transformative experiences I've had as a therapist have been with clients who like on paper, if like they wrote down their political beliefs and I wrote down my political beliefs, you would look at these two pieces of paper and you'd be like, wow, we wouldn't want to, they're not going to get along in therapy. They're not going to get good work done, but we do. We do get really good work done. And, they change and I change. Like I have really grown myself and my ability to like be and see other sides of situations. And I'm so grateful for that aspect of my work as a therapist, that it forces me to be in compassionate confrontation with another person.
How about you, Justine?
Yeah, I mean, Larissa's experience with clients has been a lot more diverse than mine. And a lot of that is because of where we work. I have a it was until the last couple of years a solo private practice. I now have one contractor who works with me, but I am a solo private practice. My practice is called Blue Box Counseling. I have a quote about Neil Gaiman on my business cards. Like it, if you look at my website, it's me in a superhero pose saying, "Is it time for a sidekick?" Like I attract a very specific clientele. Now, is there variation in that clientele? Of course. But when it comes to certain things like politics, most of my clients are pretty closely aligned.
That's true, but don't undersell yourself. You've had some very complicated cases.
I have, yes, the gaming community, a little more,
a little bit more intense than one would think.
yeah.
Yes.
And that's when I consulted with Larisa, and I was like, so
you're like, so tell me the ways. How do you do this?
Yeah, how do you do this? And this is so true that I'm thinking of one of my, most challenging in that I had to stretch cases. And I got consultation, and I feel like I was really able to find a deep sense of compassion for this human who, again, if I had just met them at a convention, I would have been like, no.
You probably would have been
like,
that's
not where I met them.
Right.
I met them in my therapy room, and they were in pain. And it was my responsibility, my honor to sit with them with their pain, and they made amazing progress.
Yeah.
Like it, and they knew we were very different humans. I was never,
which I think is key to why, like, what allows this to work is like neither Justine nor I practice with this idea of being like tabula rasa, which like old school psychoanalysis was like, the clients can't know anything about you. They need to project everything on you. That's the only way it's going to work. We don't practice that way. We practice as human beings, which means that like, they're going to know that like we're geeks. They're going to know that we're nerds. They know that like we have a podcast. Do they know the like personal details of our lives? No, that wouldn't be appropriate. But they have a sense of like what our values are, in the same way that they have a sense of like, what are the specific like therapy modalities and tools that we use. And so they know, like in the case of this client, like there was an understanding that like, okay, I'm signing up to do work with this therapist who has some very different opinions. And I want that. I'm choosing that.
Right. Because the client and I had a conversation where we talked about like, is this okay? Is knowing what you know about me, client, since I know nothing about you yet, but you have looked me up online, and I've, these disclosures. Are you okay working with me? And, they were down with it. And it made for some great conversations, because I was able to be like, that thing you just said, could you say more about that? I'm noticing I'm having a feeling. Because we're humans too, and we're going to have feelings. And it gives the client an opportunity to experience what that's like in a safe place.
Right.
Because someone out in the world might just be like, you are an a-hole. Instead of saying, ooh, I just had a feeling, let's talk about that. Which is such a more productive and healing way to interact.
I love all of our head nods. We're like bobbleheads over here. We're like, yeah.
This is what therapists do all day.
That's right. The compassionate nod.
Let's talk about the book. So you had mentioned that you guys met in grad school, and you've obviously stayed friends through this. You've obviously had different conversations. So tell me about the book.
Yes. Well, Larisa, would you like to tell the tale, the lore?
Tale. Oh my God, that's right.
Before that, what is the book about?
Justine, do you want to tell that tale?
Yeah. Yeah, I will tell that too.
Great.
So Starship Therapise, Using Therapeutic Fanfiction to Rewrite Your Life, is a self-help book for folks who either hate or have never read a self-help book. We've laid out different areas of life, your family, your relationship to your body, and used fandom examples to help complex psychological concepts be more approachable for everyday folks. And therapeutic fan fiction is the style of therapy that we have created, which is all about pulling fictional characters out into your own life and, rewriting the story of you that you maybe want to make a change in.
Good job.
Also, there's yoga and meditation and
That's
really
right.
cute art.
Well, because we take a lot of tools from more like conventional, not just conventional self-help books, but like conventional psychotherapy and fanfic it. We give it a wonderful and delightful, playful fandom twist, because one of our other core beliefs is that people need to play more.
Yes, especially adults.
Not as a distraction, not as like, oh, I'm not going to focus on this terrible email from my boss, so I'm just going to like listen to a podcast and play a video game and I don't know, try to read a book. If you're doing that, like that's a level of distraction where like no judgment, but like maybe there's some things you're having a hard time sitting with. So call a therapist, they can help you learn how to sit with those things. But play more in the sense of you give yourself permission to play and just become engrossed and enveloped in it. And it's a way to practice being with big feelings without letting those feelings overwhelm you, without letting those feelings hurt you, just being present with them. And learning how to learning who you are, discovering yourself and making meaning in your life. Play is such a wonderful place that we can practice all kinds of cognitive flexibility, I suppose.
Yeah. And I came up with this after we wrote the book, but Mr. Rogers said that play is the work of childhood, and I say that play is the meaning making of adulthood.
That's right. But we came up with this originally at an Olive Garden. Okay, so this was what, like 5.5? No, God, it was six, almost 7 years ago. At the time I was still living in Minnesota. Justine and I were like finalizing our licensure, and it turned out that like for lots of reasons that like we don't need to get into right now, I was going to move to Chicago. And at the time I had been working very part-time at Justine's private practice, but the plan had always been that like once I finished up my licensure that I would join her. It would be this like beautiful dynamic duo working together. But then I was going to move, and like, I kind of lit all of that up in flames. Obviously that wasn't my reason for doing it, but that was what was happening. Dracarys. Yes, it was a Dracarys. It was a very sad Dracarys. And so we're at the Olive Garden because it was our final like co-supervision, which is something you have to do when you're getting licensed. And I think we had just ordered like our salad and our breadsticks. and I was telling Justine, I was like, we're going to stay friends and we're going to keep working on things. And she looked at me and she was like, I don't believe you. Like, I want to, but I just don't believe you. And I started crying because that's what I do when I have a big feeling. I cry. And at that moment I made myself internally a solemn vow. I was like, that's not going to happen. We are going to keep finding things to work on together. And I told her that, and she was like, you seem very serious and parts of me want to believe you, but nonetheless, I just don't know. And so after I moved, we wrote our first book chapter together for Supernatural Pop Psychology. And we started our podcast. And then at around the same time that we started our podcast, we started workshopping the idea of this book. And the rest, as they say, is history. 7 years later, we're still working on stuff and we're still best buds.
What is supernatural pop psychology?
So it's supernatural psychology. It's part of the pop culture psychology series
Fun
Travis
fact about
very
me is I
particular about
never
that.
get it right. You're right. Say it one more time because I've butchered it so many times. Give it to us one more time, Justine.
Yep. So there is a series of books. Head nerd of the herd is Dr. Travis Langley. He's the lead editor on these. They're the pop culture psychology series. And Larissa and I have contributed to supernatural psychology, daredevil psychology, Black Panther psychology, Westworld psychology, the Joker and psychology. And there's a new one coming out, but we can't tell you what it is yet.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm so glad that you said that because I was about to be like, and the new one is, but
Nope.
that would have been bad.
And we're not editing this either, so we can't cut that
Right,
out.
we can't have accidents,
Yeah,
and so we
say
didn't.
it is.
Thank God.
Right. Yep. You would have gotten in trouble. It would have been a Tom Holland moment.
Oh God, I don't want to do that. I'm not cute enough to like make that fly.
Yes, but I had to turn around because I have all the books sitting behind me. And we've contributed to some other books too, but that's then
This is
we're
a
just
big one.
listing our entire
Mhm.
catalog.
Right, and the people don't need that.
They don't
They
need
can
to know.
Google us. They can find that information on your lips.
And when did you start the podcast?
5
20
years ago?
Yeah, like 2017-ish.
And
That
so-
feels right. Mhm.
So tell me about some of the topics that you address in the podcast. It's got the same title as the book.
Mhm. Yes. I was very proud of the name Starship Therapise.
You came up with it as
It
well as
came-
the spelling.
It came to me one day and I was like, this is it. Because we'd been trying to figure out what we wanted kind of our brand to be.
Yes.
And when that came to me one day, then we had to decide on the spelling. And I was like, well, it needs to have an S, just like the Enterprise. Things that we've talked about, so many at this point. And people often ask, do you have a topic first and then you pick a fandom to pair it with? Do you pick a fandom and then a topic appears? Sometimes one, sometimes the other.
Yeah, it really depends. Like recently, our last one that we thought was going to kick things off until poor Justine got COVID, we looked at transgenerational trauma and healing intergenerational wounds in the movie Encanto.
And I got all up in my high horse about how every therapist now is like, look, pop culture can help with psychology.
Mhm.
And I'm
And you're
like,
where were all of you with Black Panther? Or like, any of the others? There we go.
Mhm.
What else? We've done so many. We of course looked at WandaVision in terms of grieving.
Mhm.
And complex grief and the way that emotions can overwhelm us and we can do sometimes really terrible things when we are in incredible pain.
Yeah. We talk a lot about narrative therapy, which is a style of therapy both of us use, which is all about rewriting stories,
Yep.
the stories of our lives. And I'm also high level trained in a type of therapy called internal family systems. So we talk about that a lot. At its base, internal family systems is just talking about different parts of us that feel different ways, right? So you get invited out to coffee with someone, there's a part of you that really wants to go, and there's a part of you that wants to stay home in your pajamas. And which seems very simple and intuitive, and it is, but it can actually be really emotionally healing for folks. And we've looked at lots of different fandoms for that, Westworld especially.
Oh yeah. Our first one that we did with it was Ghost Whisperer. It's a fun fact. That's a deep cut.
It is a deep cut.
Because you were like, it's like a seance. It's a seance bringing all your parts up.
Oh yeah, I was really into that seance thing for a while. I now think our next episode, which we're gonna get back on the train soon, we're writing another book right now, will be IFS and Our Flag Means Death.
Yes, pirates.
Mm-hmm.
Pirates
And
with big feelings.
How we all have a crew inside of us.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys done Pleasantville at all?
No, but I loved that movie.
Mhm.
When was the last time you saw it?
15 years ago.
Probably 10 years ago.
Does it not hold up?
Think about it. That's my suggestion. You don't have to pay me for that.
Okay, good, because we have no money. Spoilers, there's no money in publishing Friends and Home.
So tell me about the book you guys are doing.
The new book?
Mm.
Yes, so the new book does not have a title yet, but the working title is The Grieving Therapist.
Okay.
And I will let Larisa describe that one. Since you
Wow,
already brought up
you're gonna hand that one off to me.
Well, you already brought up Marx and Byung.
That's true. I did. It's been so long now that I don't know if I feel like this was sort of an idea that our editor had after we had done Starship Therapise, and they really liked working with us. They were like, are there some other books that you can do? And we sort of went back and forth on some options. And she actually said to us, what if you did something about what it's like to be a therapist grieving, or what it's like to be a therapist during times of like great national and global turmoil? Because we had this meeting with her probably during the second year of the pandemic. And initially I was like, no. And Justine was like, yes, let's do this. Justine was very fired up. She was like, this is going to be really important. Like, it's so hard right now to be like a practicing clinician and also just like a person existing. There was certainly no guidebook for how to be a therapist during a pandemic. And so Justine was very fired up with the idea of like writing the first one. And I was like,
I do like being a trailblazer. That's why I'm the captain.
That's true. That's why you're the captain. And I'm like coming full circle here with where we started on our little chat today. I was very tired and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can just like write about what it's like to practice during this time of such collective sadness and trauma, and what it's been like to sit with folks through that and then like get out of sessions and just be faced with like my like entire family of origin getting COVID, or like getting off of session and like, I don't like finding out when like Justine got COVID, or
there was a mass shooting.
Or like the murder of Mr. George Floyd. So it was just, there were so many things. And I was like, God, we're going to go back and we're going to re-experience these feelings and write a guidebook for other therapists on how to keep practicing and feel your feelings. I know you're looking at your face, Scott. You're like, why did you do that, Larisa? No. We're halfway through now. And I'm still like, God, I don't know, but we're halfway through. And I think you'll like this, Scott. We kept going back and forth on like, how do we make this not so grim? No one's going to want to read this book if it's just, and then this sad thing happened. And how do you grieve that? So we used this framing device that's based on, of course, the hero's journey. And the idea is that you're a therapist moving through the 9 realms of grief. And in each realm, you encounter 2 sages. And those sages are, you know, like they're like sort of like respected professionals or researchers in the field, either of psychotherapy or philosophy or marriage and family therapy. And then in each realm, you know, of course you're grieving and you're sad, but you're also learning things about how you want to practice, that you don't want to practice. And that's the book.
Yep. I've been colloquially calling it How to Be a Therapist at the End of the World,
which I think is a better title. Please, folks, enter the chat and let us know which you prefer.
Well, there's no
Oh, then don't enter the chat. You can't.
No, you're going to have a really hard time if you attempt to enter the chat.
You can send us a carrier pigeon or a singing telegram.
Yes.
So, or slide into our DMs.
So where can people find you?
Yes, people can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom.
You can find me on all the Starship Therapise social media accounts. I'm not going to list them off because I always forget where the underscore is. If you just type it in, you'll find us. And then if you're like, wow, Larisa, I really want to connect with you. And if you want to wade through Twitter, which, spoiler alert, I actually don't a lot, but I am on Twitter at Spock's All Ears. And what I do there is retweet cute animal videos. And sometimes I share.
The point of Twitter, you should be attacking people.
I know. I don't do that though. I retweet cute animal videos. And then I'm really into the Dragon Age video game series. And I replayed it during the last like 2 years of the pandemic. And so I would like live tweet to, I don't know, like the 2 people who were awake and following me at 1 a.m. on how things were going in Kirkwall.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so we do have a podcast called Starship Therapise, which you can find,
and a website
wherever you get your fine podcasts. Yes. And I also have another podcast called Dark Side of the Mat, which is an investigative journalism podcast that is all about the cults, creeps, and crimes that you find in the yoga industry. And there are lots of them.
And if any of these podcasts sound like fun to you and you want to throw us some patronage, each of them have little Patreon things. So, you know, no shade if you can't, but if you can, we like coffee.
Also, we love consulting. Do you need help with your graphic novel? Do you want to make sure that the mental illness in your graphic novel is accurate?
Is accurate and attuned.
Ringy dingy.
Okay.
We'll just keep plugging things till you shut us up.
Sure, so
That's right. You're like, guys, we're done.
where can people find your book?
Wherever books are sold. It is a real book from a real publisher. People do not believe us because they're like, there's no way that a real publisher did Starship Therapise using therapeutic fanfiction to rewrite your life. But they did. It is distributed by Penguin freaking Random House. So wherever you get your books, you can get it straight from Penguin or our publisher, North Atlantic Books, or, you know, you can get it from the big box Bezos if that's your preference or availability.
It's also in an audiobook form if you want to hear the dulcet tones of us reading to you.
I do
it's
voices.
Of course, an ebook. Yeah, she does. It's true. I don't do voices.
Okay, so I think we're going to end it there. And so thank you both very much. Stick around for just a second.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for watching us. And again, if you are interested in all of the links or many of the links for Justine and Larisa's books and podcasts and whatnot are in the chat. And so you'll be able to click on any of those to find them. And also, if you are interested in a free digital copy of Visitations #1, please email me at visitationscomicbook@gmail.com, all one word, or click the link below. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Take care. Oop, wrong one. Hold on. We have not